Welcome to this very interesting video where I'm going to analyze a game that features the world champion, two comedians, and a world class player. So it was Samay and Vidit in one team against Magnus Carlsen and Abhishek Upmanyu, a very famous comedian, stand up comedian in India. So these were the two teams. You can see the thumbnail above me. Upmanyu and Magnus on the left, Samay and Vidit in one team, and Vishy Anand also on the thumbnail, but Vishy Anand wasn't playing this game. He joined in the stream later. It was a very exciting game because when you have two world class players playing, there are low chances of errors happening. But when you have two comedians joining in, then there is more fun. Mistakes can happen, how they would react, how the world class players would play. So what basically Magnus and Vidit were in two separate teams. They would call out a piece or a pawn, and which one had to be determined by the comedians. So just to give you an example of how the game began, it was pawn was called out by Samay, and Vidit played. Pawn was called out by Vidit, and Samay played pawn to e4. And then pawn by Magnus, and Upmanyu played e5. And here, Vidit and Samay being good friends, they knew that Samay likes to play the king's gambit, and therefore Vidit called out a pawn, and f4 it was. And this made the game very exciting because you're going to play the king's gambit against the world champion. That's something. Pawn, so the pawn was taken. Knight f3, g5, and you can see that this was already becoming very dangerous. In fact, here when a pawn was told by Magnus, it could be quite possible to play even the move d6, which is very safe. g5 is of course theory, but very risky move. And now after bishop c4, there was another very dangerous move played by black with pawn g4, and at that point Vidit said king, and castling was done. So this is called the Muzio gambit. After gf3, queen f3, you sacrifice a knight and you take queen takes f3, and over here white is saying to black, look, I have a bishop out, I have two pieces, I'm looking at your king. Yes, you are a piece up, but all your pieces are inside. It's not going to be easy. In fact, I learned this opening when I was a young kid. My coach showed me this book called Winning Chess Openings by Yasser Sairawan, and Muzio Gambit was one of the openings in that book. And I was like, what? Can you sacrifice a piece like this? So very typical example of how development can help you to get compensation in a game. So d6 was played here in the game, which is not the best move. Better would have been queen to f6, and this is, you cannot really play this if you are not prepared for it, and also it's not so clear. Like after e5 you must take. Bishop f7 is a dangerous move. There are other options also, like you can go d3 with the idea of picking up this pawn, but then black goes bishop h6. The game goes on. But you could also play takes and d4, and here it's very important for you to play the move queen f5. It could also seem like queen takes d4 is possible, but already black is walking on thin ice after bishop e3. Let's say queen f6 and bishop takes f4. When the position becomes very, very violent, anything can happen. This king is really going to be in some trouble. So d6 was not a great move. Queen f6 was better. After queen takes f4, now f7 is hanging, and here Magnus was already starting to feel a little bit uncomfortable. You could feel it, but he said pawn and f6. It was a very solid move. Here maybe it was prudent to continue with, let's say, knight c3 and just development, but queen was moved to h4, queen e7, knight c3. By the way, the threat was after queen h4 was to give a check from h5 here, So he played queen e7 so that to make some space for the king. Knight c3, bishop e6 was played, and now the knight jumped in to d5 over here. So because nd5 was a big threat, you could play c6, but well, developing and stopping a threat is much better. So takes, and after queen f7, Vidit called out the move bishop, and here actually Samay made a very good move, because I think that's the best move in the position, which was bishop e2. And the idea was to put the bishop on h5 and to pin this queen. Yeah. Very, very interesting move. King was called out by Magnus. Abhishek played his king to d8, and after bishop h5, now when Magnus called out queen, it was a tough moment for Upmanyu to decide where to move the queen. Should he play it to g7, which was the much safer and a good move, or should he take the pawn, which was very tempting, and he went for it. But this turns out to be a blunder. Here Vidit called out a rook, and this is where the the nice game begins, because if it was Vidit's move, he would have of course taken on f6, and now the threat is to pick up this bishop. If you take, I take queen f6 and I take the rook with a completely winning position for white. For example, let's say you don't even first, you can insert this check, and wherever the king goes, d7, you insert the check and then you pick up the rook. So you are completely winning. Your bishop is not hanging on h5. But Samay moved the rook to e1, which was a mistake, a pretty big error, and this gave away the initiative. Rook takes f6 would have been a winning move. I think black could have fought on with knight e7, but let's say after bishop f3, where does the queen go? For example, let's say queen here, you go d4, is just tempo gain. So let's say I play queen b5, and here there are many ways. Just d4 with the idea of playing bishop g5 is just sufficient to win. So rook e1, and now knight e7, good move. Bishop f3, again queen b5 was a nice move. Queen a5 was stronger, because in case of, let's say, a move like d4, the queen keeps an eye on this e1 rook, which can be very useful later on. So queen b5, not bad. Queen into f6, rook g8. Here instead of queen f6, perhaps a much stronger move could well have been something like a4, queen a5 here, and now b4, and you're playing in this sacrificial way, like I want to develop my bishop quickly on b2 and all of that, and could have been much better than what happened in the game, because queen f6, rook g8, you see after d3 black unraveled. Queen f7, again knight e5, sorry, and now the knight attacks the queen and also the bishop, and after queen f4, bishop g7, very good play by black. Magnus and Upmanyu takes on f3, king takes, queen c6, and here if the queens were exchanged, this is already losing. So Vidit said rook, and he played rook e4, trying to avoid the queen exchange, and after rook f8, I think Samay lost his concentration here, and he moved the queen to g3. Of course, queen e2 was much better, but after knight g6, black is completely winning. It's without doubt. But he played queen g3, and that's where Magnus shouted out rook, and Upmanyu played his rook to f1, and that was all she wrote. That was game over, and Magnus and Abhishek Upmanyu had beaten Vidit and Samay Raina. A very nice game. Also teaches us a lot about the King's Gambit, which is slowly becoming a very popular opening because Samay has started playing it a lot. Also, on the other hand, it leads to very imbalanced positions, and you see this Muzio Gambit is not played very often. There's a game between Nakamura and Andrekin in this line in World Blitz, but it's not seen often, and analyzing such positions can help you improve your tactical vision and ideas. Nice game, and I hope you enjoyed the analysis. Thank you so much. This is Sagar Shah signing off. Thank you. Bye bye.